You're listening to Kaio Conversations, a podcast about anything and everything that matters to Chi Omegas.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of our favorite podcast, Kaio Conversations. I'm your host, Leslie Harrington, CEO of Chi Omega. And today we are joined by one of our interfraternal friends and one of our most highly rated Firesides Leadership Training speakers, Dr. Will Frankenberger. Will is the Chief Learning Officer for Delta Zeta National Headquarters and holds a PhD in Adult Learning and Leadership. He is also a certified mental health first aid trainer, a member of Delta Sigma Phi, and a highly sought after speaker within the fraternal community at large. Will's trainings focus on the power of honest and direct dialogue when working with all people. I think you're going to find him authentic, engaging, and downright hilarious. Welcome to Kaio Conversations, my friend. It's good to see you again.
Hi, Leslie. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we are just as excited as you are. Thank you again for always saying yes when Chi Omega comes calling, which is quite often. To our podcasters who might be asking themselves right now, why are we having a man talk to us about conflict resolution in a women's space? I'd like you to address that just right off the bat in a segment we call About Me in 60. You're going to get 60 seconds to tell our listeners more about why you do this work and about Will in general. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Well, you just go for it. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, I am really honored to be here. And you're absolutely right. As somebody who's been a professional sorority man my entire career, I've always found myself in women-centered and women-to-own spaces. And it is always a privilege and an honor to be in them. My background has been always working in the sorority space. I grew up with many sisters. And so women have been my jam my entire existence. And I've observed women through these things. And so that's why I'm here. But I do acknowledge the literal definition of mansplaining is a man telling a group of women how to process and act and feel. And that's part of what my job often is. But I say that as a researcher who spent a lot of time in the space, but also always recognize this isn't my identity and this isn't the lived experience that I have. And so trying to be really mindful of storytelling through others that I hear and through my experiences in this. But I'm always so honored to be an ally and an advocate in these spaces, and was just so honored by Chi Omega having me at the Fireside Leadership Training and meeting with the women who shared just some grateful impacts and also provided me feedback to be the best kind of male ally to be in this space. And so I'm honored to be here, but recognize it's definitely unique. There's thousands of women that could be here. I'm just excited to be able to be a part of this conversation and continue to move it forward.
Well, thank you for saying that. There is no shortage of feedback when it comes to our members after they listen to a speaker. So when we were there, you had a long line of Chi Omegas coming up to you afterwards. I think what you said really resonated with them, and we're going to get to hear some of that today. But I'm interested, you said you consider yourself a professional sorority man. Tell me more about what that means to you and how that identity has really taken shape over the years.
Yeah, it's my fun joke of the work that I get to do. You know, the fraternal industry is so much better than it was even a decade or a half ago when I started this work. At the time, it was pretty siloed, right? Men work for men's groups, women work for women's groups. The two shall not meet, really. And so I think we've seen in the last decade quite a bit of expansion of mindset and thinking for the headquarters professionals that do the work. And I certainly was not the first man to be in the sorority space. I stand on the shoulders of a lot of really great folks that have done work. But, you know, early in my career in higher ed, we do a lot of jumping around. That's very common, right? And I just established early that I really enjoyed the sorority space. I enjoyed becoming knowledgeable about as much depth as I could in the space. And I knew I wanted to commit to the sorority work. And so I kind of joked and said, well, if I'm going to do this, I've got to be the best professional sorority man I can be. And so I try to learn things like total and quota plus additions and flex minus lists and the things that are the R that I don't deal with. I like the risk R more, but really have also come to learn and value the history of our women's-based organizations and the incredible founders that our members stand on the shoulders of and what they overcame. And so for me, I guess I'm a fraternal professional and I love that work, but I really dedicate my work and my time to the sorority work, the sorority mission, advancing those conversations and helping sorority women. So I get to be a professional sorority man that does that and am just a huge fan, a stan, I think as our friends say nowadays, of the sorority experience. And so that's really what shapes my identity as a professional sorority man.
I'm so grateful you're bringing this to the forefront because you've had a lot of experience. You're a wealth of talent and wisdom. And today I really want to tap into those insights on conflict resolution a little further. We're going to call this segment Talk It Out.
Okay.
So let's talk about it. Because you have had such rave reviews, I'm hoping you can give us just like a little sample size version of your 2025 Firesides Leadership Training talk that you gave our attendees there. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure. Brevity is not my strength, but I'll do my best.
We can cut
Oh, perfect. That's great. I think the biggest thing that we really wanted to lean into is I started, dreaming this with Chi Omega, with you, Leslie, and your incredible staff team there. It was the same problem that we were having in Delta Zeta, right? It was our women sometimes are just not always kind to each other. And sometimes things that are between two members, everybody wants to be a part of it because, again, the root core of sisterhood is to be fiercely loyal and fiercely protective. And what an incredible gift that we have. However, that gift can be used not always for good and can be used for evil. And unfortunately, that's when we have the drama and that starts. In Delta Zeta, I joke, we have Delta Zeta and we have Drama Zeta. And we try to avoid that one as much as we can. And so the thing that we really talked about was ways that, in this case, the attendees that were there, and whether you're a leader or not, how you foster clear, compassionate, and caring communication. And so the way that we often have these conversations is through our ability to navigate complexity, our ability to lean into people that don't see the world the same way that we see it. And instead of running and defending our point, just furthering our understanding of where that comes from. I think we talk a lot about also understanding that in conflict, a lot of people have this idea of being conflict avoidant, and that's a real thing that does exist. However, I think some people paint a negative picture about folks that are conflict avoidant. And so it was really about understanding conflict avoidant people just might be finding the right way to come into the conversation or how to process that. But if you are like me and you embrace conflict and it doesn't scare you, well, if I'm engaging with a conflict avoidant person, now it doesn't matter how caring and compassionate I can be, we're creating tension. And so really understanding not only who you are in the space, but how others might show up in the space. And so really digging into that. And we use something called the health belief model that looks at our behaviors are motivated by things that are our fears of susceptibility, right? What we think might happen, which I think we've all sat in that space and been like, so should I say something? Should I not say something? Well, if I say it, what happens? What's the outcome of that? We talk about the barriers of it. And in sorority, that can be a lot of things. Maybe I'm a new member who Chi Omega desperately needs and wants, and you have equal value in our chapter, but the person who you're having a problem with is a senior. And you're like, is that a barrier? Can I even talk to this person, right? Do I even have the authority to address them, right? Or, with our advisors, we have incredible volunteer advisors who do this work from their heart of hearts, but sometimes they step in it and they struggle. And if I'm a collegiate leader, how can I provide that feedback to my advisor to make sure that they have a good experience, but also to let them know the power of their words and the impact positively or negatively it might have had? And so we look at the barriers. And then the last thing are the benefits, right? So what are the benefits? What are the things that would happen? And I find, in particular, women more than men, and research supports this, we are living in the space of susceptibility and barrier. We don't often get to the space of benefit. And so we often don't talk about it because the susceptibility and the barrier outweigh the perceived benefit that we see. And so our self-efficacy or our ability to do it then is often stunted, and we sit. And then resentment gets built. And then we end up leaving or quitting because we never faced the fear of talking it out. And so we really spent a lot of time talking about the skills to do that, what those barriers were, and identifying that not only in ourselves as leaders, but also what we can do as leaders in Chi Omega to be aware of that with our members and get them to start working through those barriers. So that's a lot of what we talked about.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. I feel like there are so many nuggets of advice in there. What are some easy things someone can do right away to keep themselves in check when it comes to conflict resolutions? Are there any hot tips about don't do this, definitely do this? Listen is probably one of them.
Yeah, that's a pretty big one. But again, it's coupled with everything else. So the first thing anytime I teach conflict resolution work that I ask people to know is, who are you in conflict? A lot of the activities that I do when I teach corporate conflict work or when I teach it to a sorority chapter or an elementary classroom of young kids, I do this thing where I will stand in the middle of the room and I say, I am conflict. And I ask people in the room to stand close to me in relationship of where they are, and we've got people outside the room. We've got people right next to me. We've got people in the middle. And I will often say, if you can't place yourself in your conflict, well, it doesn't matter how you approach it, right? Because if you don't know who you are when a conflict arises, it's kind of like it is a total crapshoot of what's going to happen and how you're going to come out in that. The second thing I think always is, what's the outcome? A lot of people, when we talk about conflict resolution, we paint this picture that it is like the Alphaba Glinda story where we have to leave and be best friends for forever. And that's such lore in conflict resolution work. There's 3 main levels. We talk about conflict management, conflict resolution, and conflict transformation. Conflict transformation is that that conflict would never happen again. We are better as a result of that conflict. We've embraced and made each other's lives better. There's a lot of I think love stories that started with that. I met my husband now who I despised when we first started dating. And over time we got to know, and it's like that fairy tale thing. But that's so rare. So many people don't achieve that, but that's what we think is healthy conflict resolution is that. Conflict resolution is that middle one, and that's really, it's not a de-escalation or an escalation, but what it means is we are not going to agree, but we're going to commit to some terms on how we're going to operate to maintain respect with one another. And that also means then letting things go. It's that I'm going to agree to disagree, but then we keep digging into it. When in reality, we should agree to disagree, and we're going to set some rules that say, I'm not going to talk negatively about that person or that topic in front of you because I know that's just going to upset you. You're not going to talk about it in front of me. We're not going to try to change each other's positions right now because we're just not open to that. Or we're going to agree that we're going to come into the space at different times. We're going to try not to be around each other. Whatever those agreements are, that we can not have an escalation of the fight or the conflict or a de-escalation. But the last one that people just throw away is conflict management. And that really is just letting it lie. It's not feeding into the fire, and it's not trying to resolve it. I deal with this a lot in personal, I travel a lot, and I see people get really heated in airports, for example, and they'll get really mad at a gate agent about something like a weather delay. Well, I don't know that person. And so for me to walk up to try to start to mediate that is doing what? And so I have to be mindful, for me, is that going to de-escalate or escalate it? I don't know that person. Are they worth that investment? So my conflict management is probably just to not engage with that, right? And so I often go back to it's the conversation of what's better, being right or being happy. And sometimes in conflict management at the lowest rung, that's the first question. Is it more important to me to be right in this, or is it more important for me just to be happy and not escalate it, not de-escalate it, but just sort of let it lie? And that's healthy. And so I think those are the 2 biggest things: knowing who you are and knowing the outcome that you want. Those are going to shape then the way you navigate through that conflict. But if you don't start with those 2 things, you might be shooting for transformation, and that's actually not what any party wants. So you've already gone down the wrong path. And so I think separating that out is really healthy and important for us to know.
All those distinctions, I think, are the most important things that you've said, because we can all agree that today's society is a tiny bit more divisive than it has been in recent history. And so the fact that you're saying we don't have to be best friends, we don't have to change the person's mind to match our own. Sometimes we agree to disagree, but we actually need to develop those boundaries for how we move forward and don't continue to dig in. The more you talk, the more I realize there are so many myths around conflict resolution. And so this is perfect because our next segment is called Mythbusters. Mm-hmm. So for us, I want you to tell us, what is a conflict myth you wish every sorority chapter could unlearn?
Yeah, women who engage in conflict are not the B word, and women who choose not to engage in conflict are not a passive and avoidant. I think that's the biggest myth. I think if we could help chapter women in particular understand conflict is natural, conflict is healthy, and we can engage in that. And by engaging in it, it doesn't mean you're this or that, but there's a whole spectrum of assertive, healthy, appropriate communication in there. I think we would have a much more comfortable environment to engage in those discussions, but we've got to start recognizing it doesn't have to be either or. I'm a big fan of eliminating but from our vocabulary, right? We hear this Leslie, I love you, but, versus I change the word often to link it with and. Leslie, I love you. And sometimes it's difficult when I talk to you because It feels like you're not always hearing me out or you're defensive about my position. When I say I love you, but you already start to get your deflection up. And that's when that narrative starts to happen. I'm an avoider because I'm so uncomfortable to say this, or I'm really aggressive and I dig in, and my I love you is passive because you're getting to that. But when we say and, that's actually the assertive part. Hey, I love you and I respect the heck out of you. And I also struggle with how you sometimes share feedback with me, and it makes me feel a little bit less than. And I wish that's something we could work on together. And I will be better at communicating my needs. But I ask that you think about when you give me feedback that you might have to amend your approach a little bit so that I can maintain my care and respect for you like I know you have for me. It changes the narrative entirely if we can work on those skills.
It feels super warm too. And I'm like sitting here thinking like, have I given him feedback? He did not enjoy it. But I want to talk about another myth. I feel like, especially in our system of accountability, Delta Zeta has one too, standards. We call it the fair play procedure, personnel.
Mm-hmm.
There is always conflict there. And so sometimes I hear, I don't want to engage in this conflict because it feels better to keep the peace. And I don't want someone to think of me as accusatory or being judgy. Onto that.
Yeah, gosh, that is like such a challenge. And to that person who thinks that, I hope you know you are so not alone in that. And that there's no magic pill that makes that go away. And so I think the first thing you have to recognize is that's a natural fear. The second thing that I always tell people as they engage in these conversations is recognizing conflict is absolutely natural and it's totally necessary. And just because we're going to have that conversation and you're going to be placed in a spot to have that kind of challenge, you can do that in a way that still is caring. You can do that in a way that still is with love, that's not accusatory, that's not direct, that comes from what we often say, like an assumption of positive intent. Mm-hmm. And I think when we approach things that way, it changes the way we have conflict with people. So I'll give you an example. I talk with parents a lot. Yeah. And parents talk to their daughter primarily and get the understanding of what happened from their daughter's lens. Well, when a parent calls me and is feisty on the jump, which I understand because somebody has discredited their child or their child has felt negatively about something, the first thing I'll often say is, thank you so much for calling. And I just want you to know your daughter is so lucky to have you as a parent that so passionately cares and protects them. I'm just so grateful that you would take the time out to chat with me and understand a bit more about what I might not know and also share that with me. Just from starting from a place of thanking them for being here, it just immediately de-escalates people. Yeah. And so for me to be scared to engage in the conflict, well, now already they've set a tone that it's slower. They've set a tone that they're not coming in being accused of anything, but rather this is truly a discussion. And then the other part of that as we have the conversation is recognizing, it's not personal. Some people make choices and those choices don't define them in their whole lives. It was a choice they made in that moment. And I think especially for our college students, I get it. Life is hard sometimes, and sometimes you lose your ability to self-manage and you drink too much that night. And that does lead you to be a spicy, feistier person. And you do say some really hurtful things. Does that mean that you're a horrible human being? Absolutely not. And when I come to my standards board, does my standards boards approach me as that was the most egregious, horrible thing that's ever happened? Or can they approach it from a lens of, hey, this was really unlike you. And normally we haven't had this interaction. So before we even get into what it was, is everything okay? And are you okay? And I think changing the tone and assuming that positive intent, backing into things, it actually makes people approach conflict more from a place of care, like we would anyone else that we saw crying or upset. We're not afraid to go up to them to go, hey, are you okay? Can I do something for you? But when it's a conflict, we would never approach it that way. But there's no reason we can't change the narrative to say, like, even in this fight that's happening right now, is everyone okay? And what's starting this? And I think to approach it from that lens changes our ability and it changes people's defensiveness, because when they get defensive back to us, we get defensive back. And that's what causes that accusatory, like, oh, I don't want to do that again. But if we can stay in the driver's seat of not writing assumptions and assuming a positive understanding and letting them tell us what's happening rather than us telling them what they did wrong, it would change, I think, a lot of the narrative back and forth. And I see that in parenting. I see that in corporate work. That's in all facets of any conflict.
So the main point really is that it's not judgy, it's necessary, and you can do it through a caring tone.
Yeah.
Right? You can still address whatever the problem is through a caring tone. And the first thing is ask them if they're okay.
Yeah.
Find that out first. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's also about sometimes taking the beat and getting some of the emotion and initial emotions that we feel out of that and setting back into a place of trying to be positive. And so that's why I say, like, sometimes avoiders of conflict are not avoiders. They just need some time to process that initial flare up of reaction so that they're approaching things sensibly. And that's not a bad thing, right? I am a dominator in my nature. I want to fix it. I don't like tension. I don't want it to sit there. But I would argue, even in my approach, sometimes it doesn't fully resolve the conflict because it's more immediate, it's quicker. Mm-hmm. I didn't actually get a chance to settle back and think about, how did that impact me and what do I ultimately want? In my mind, I kind of just want to put out the fire real quick, and that's the end of it, so that I feel good and they feel good. But sometimes avoiders are our best conflict partners because they've actually had some time to think and they've journaled. And it's not just, I want an apology. They want to change in how maybe we approach somebody. And so I think finding those people too, to recognize the way they show up in the space is healthier in our conflicts rather than just putting out the fire right now. Sometimes we need that time to process. You know, I'm a big fan. I like to drive, even though I live in Chicago. Now I walk more. But if I've had a really bad day, I sometimes just need to go on a walk before and I might write that email draft and I'm going to go for a walk and then I'm going to come back to it. Because sometimes it's hard to separate the emotions out of a conflict. And we need to acknowledge that's a part of it. And so doing that first then allows us to have that compassionate and clear approach, as opposed to one that is defensive and can often lead to drama, right? We want to stay in the C's, not the D's. We want to have clear, compassionate conflict, not direct and dramatic drama. Those are the bad things that we want to avoid.
The C's, that goes so well with Chi Omega. We can adopt this. It's on brand. Thank you, Will. And thanks to all of you for tuning in today. I hope you learned something very valuable to take back to your chapters, your jobs, and your personal lives. I know that I have. Be sure to come back for even more fun and enlightening talks this season with fellow sisters and friends of Chi Omega. And be sure to like and follow us on social media so you can stay tuned for our next Chi O Conversation.